This chart shows the current scale of U.S. dollar dominance. It currently accounts for 56% of all foreign currency reserves and is involved in a staggering 89% of all global currency trading. A reserve currency functions as the world's primary safe haven asset. Foreign central banks hold these dollars in their coffers to facilitate international trade and protect their own domestic economies from sudden volatility. This status grants the United States what former French President Charles de Gaulle called an exorbitant privilege. Because the world must use dollars, the U.S. can borrow more cheaply than its peers, print money to pay for imports, and exercise a level of financial influence that no other nation can match. However, history shows that this position is not a fixed state. Every currency that has reached this peak has eventually been displaced by another. Identifying why these seemingly permanent systems eventually fail requires looking at the specific economic mechanics that connect today's record-high U.S. debt to a cycle that has repeated for centuries. In the 13th century, the gold-based Venetian ducat and the Florentine florin were the primary tools for trade between Europe and the Arab world, chosen specifically because gold was easier to transport over long distances. By the 16th century, the Spanish silver dollar became the first truly global reserve currency, fueled by a massive supply of silver from mines in the Americas and recognized across Europe, Asia, and the New World. The British pound sterling took the lead in the 19th century. Backed by the empire's industrial output, over 60% of world trade was invoiced in pounds, and London became the undisputed center for global insurance and investment. The pound's dominance ended after the massive debt surges required to fund World War I and World War II. By the 1950s, a system that once seemed invincible was on the verge of bankruptcy. This created a vacuum that the U.S. dollar filled after 1945. At the time, the United States was the world's largest creditor, with a stable, debt-free domestic economy. These shifts suggest that the very act of becoming a global reserve currency creates the structural conditions, specifically a buildup of domestic debt, that leads to its eventual replacement. Belgian American economist Robert Triffin identified this process as a mathematical paradox. He argued that the role of the world's bank is fundamentally at odds with the stability of the host nation. To function as a global reserve, the host nation must constantly supply the rest of the world with its currency. This provides the liquidity other nations need to trade and build their own reserves. This chart illustrates the trade-off. To push that much currency out into the global market, the host nation must run a continuous, massive trade deficit, effectively importing goods in exchange for its paper. This creates a structural tension. The short-term demand to provide the world with liquidity eventually erodes the host nation's long-term debt stability as foreign central banks begin to question if that debt can ever be repaid. We saw this tension play out in the United Kingdom, where the debt-to-GDP ratio surged from 27% in 1914 to a peak of 264% by 1947, directly leading to the pound's loss of status. In this model, acting as a reserve currency isn't just a prize, it's a burden that gradually drowns the host nation in its own leverage. Today, the U.S. debt-to-GDP ratio has risen by nearly 70 percentage points since 2000. For many central banks, this suggests the Triffin trap is once again closing. The situation is compounded by the use of the dollar as a geopolitical tool. Through sanctions and tariffs, the U.S. has turned its currency into a mechanism for global enforcement. This combination of fiscal deterioration and financial weaponization is driving a trend toward de-dollarization, as countries like China, Russia, and India seek to settle trades in their own local currencies. The mechanics identified by Triffin are now driving foreign central banks to aggressively search for financial systems that exist outside of the dollar's reach. This report from CIS Group highlights one of the most significant shifts, the breakdown of the 1970s oil-for-dollar deal. In 2023, 1/5 of global oil trades were reportedly made using non-dollar currencies. Parallel funding networks are also emerging. China's central bank has extended roughly $170 billion in emergency funding to countries in financial stress, offering a rescue lending system that operates independently of the Federal Reserve. We are also seeing a flight toward hard assets. Central banks have recently increased their gold holdings to roughly 27% of total reserves, seeking a store of value that cannot be devalued by another nation's fiscal policy. In the digital space, the BRICS nations are exploring a new reserve asset called the unit, while Project mBridge is testing a cross-border payment system that uses local digital currencies backed by gold. These systems are structurally different from the current order because they allow nations to bypass U.S. banks and the Federal Reserve entirely, creating a landscape where the dollar is no longer the sole gatekeeper. As the dollar's absolute dominance faces these challenges, the question is whether a single currency like the euro or the yuan will rise to take its place. This survey data from the CFA Institute suggests a different outcome. Instead of a single successor, 39% of respondents anticipate the rise of a multipolar currency system. This shift is likely to be a slow-burn, marginal erosion. As trading blocs isolate and settle trades internally, the global economy is breaking away from a single anchor into several independent spheres of influence. As global commerce moves from centralized paper toward these distributed digital ledgers, the structural weight of the Triffin dilemma is being spread out. Instead of one nation drowning in the world's debt, the burden is being divided across multiple financial poles.